webinar, before you may recognize a couple of slides, but instead of just showing you screenshots like we did last time in the business level webinar, we are going to dive right into the system and show you how you can apply what you hear from me. So Jeff and I are gonna do this jointly. I'm gonna hand over control from time to time to Jeff so he can get into the SAP system and show us how it's done. This session is going to be recorded, and you will receive an email with the recording within 24 hours. So give it a little time, and by the time tomorrow, you will have an email from GoToWebinar directly with a link to the recording. If you have any questions during the webinar, please use that GoToWebinar control panel. There are two options that you have at your disposal. One is the questions window, where you can type in the question, and I'll try to keep an eye on that, and we'll stop from time to time to address those questions. The second option is you can certainly also raise your hand in the GoToMeeting control panel. That's an indication for me that I can unmute you once we get to our question slot, and you can then simply ask your question. So those are your two options at your disposal to ask us questions. Now, with that being said, let's get right to it. The webinar is scheduled, or was scheduled, for about 2 hours. I think we'll be a little bit quicker. We've made some changes to the webinar, so we're not gonna take all 2 hours of your time. Hopefully we're gonna be done by about 90 minutes or so. So that'll give you some time back in your day. All right, so let's get going with our webinar. Before we start, just a quick look at the agenda. I'm going to tell you a few words about who Xiting is and what we do. We're going to look at very briefly at the challenges of a quote-unquote typical role redesign project, and we're going to look at how the Xiting Authorizations Management Suite can help address those challenges, mitigate them, and simplify and expedite many of those manual tasks. And Jeff, if you would mind muting us off, please.
Yep. Hang on.
And then we'll have a section where I'm going to give you some more information, like an OSS note and links to more information that you can then consume offline. And then at the end, we're going to have a separate section again for questions and answers. But please feel free during the presentation, just use that questions box, raise your hand, and we'll have a stop in between, so you don't have to wait until the very end. Few words about Xiting. Xiting was founded in 2008 by SAP security experts. We are headquartered in Switzerland, in Zurich, Switzerland. We have about 50 employees worldwide, and by worldwide I mean Germany, Switzerland, England, and as of last year in the United States. Here we are based out of Tampa, Florida, and all of our senior consultants are also SAP trainers. So we deliver and create a lot of training classes for SAP. If you go to training.sap.com, you'll find some of our courses that we offer in collaboration with SAP Education. Xiting really focuses on 4 core pillars with our portfolio, both from a solutions and services perspective. One is, of course, and that's also around the title of our webinar, around roles and authorizations. So our goal is to help you simplify, automate, and expedite many of the manual tasks that are usually involved in role optimization, role redesign, RFC optimization type of projects. We have another focus area around SAP security concepts and SAP audits. So we have a solution that can automate what typically is done on an annual basis by a third party coming in and performing a security audit. So many of the checks we have put into software, which allows you to expedite those audits. We have another area that's very hot right now, and that's around S4 HANA Migration. So we have, in a simplified way of saying that, we have taken SAP's simplification list, all 400 plus pages, and put it into our software with the result that we can automate the migration of your roles and authorizations from your legacy ERP system to S4 HANA. And there is going to be a separate webinar exactly on that subject in a couple of weeks coming up that discusses how you can expedite that migration from what you have today to S4 HANA from a roles and authorization perspective. We also have a solution that can help you with scanning your custom ABAP code to look for such things as missing authorization checks or even existing authorization checks that are not proposed in SU24, and that's going to be one of the modules we'll see today in action as well towards the end of the presentation. Now let's look very, very briefly at some of the reasons for role optimization or a role redesign project. There are plenty of them. I've already mentioned migration to S4 HANA or just to the HANA database in some cases. You may just want to simplify your role administration. You may have significantly more roles than you have users and came to the conclusion it's not a very sustainable framework and you want to simplify that. You may have certain legal requirements, organizational changes. So there are very, very many reasons of why a redesign or at least an optimization may make sense, and we'll look at some of those in more detail. But before we do, let's step on paper at least through a quote-unquote typical role redesign project, and let's look at some of the challenges that are associated with each step. So very often when you want to redesign your roles, you start with bringing in SAP's new SU24 proposals through an SU25 upgrade. Then you may run a trace analysis to figure out exactly what your users were doing in the system, so you can build roles that are based on what they need versus what you think your users may need. And then very often you create a spreadsheet with all your users and the roles, and you try to make sense of that. And you may go to the business and get their input. But the problem with that approach is it's inherently unreliable and time consuming. And that's also because your business folks may not exactly know what technical roles users need. They know what they need to get their job done, but how that translates into roles and authorizations on the back end is a completely different story. So you try to bridge that gap between your technical roles and the input from your business, and you try to complete that spreadsheet as good as you can. And that obviously has an impact on your business. They need to take time out of their day to give you that input, to look it over, to verify, and very often they don't do a very good job at that. So then once you think you have your spreadsheet complete, you go into PFCG and you build those roles. That's again a manual task that you need to go through, and you need to build out those roles, and you hopefully do that based on a solid SU24, but very often you don't have that solid SU24, so you add your T-codes and author objects very often manually, which leads to further issues down the road. You maintain your org fields. You may set up derived roles if you have a lot of roles that only differ by org fields. And then you go into testing, and of course you don't test in production, you test in queue. And there too, you need to get input from business. You may have some business users to assist with testing, to verify your test scripts, to run through those test scripts, etc., etc. And once you're done with the testing, which is going to take a certain amount of time as well, you cross your fingers and you hope that you have tested everything properly and you go live. And very often you find out that during that go live project that not everything was built as you would have hoped, and you end up with those typical war room scenarios where you have a bunch of role admins sitting in a room and taking calls from users as they get stuck and fix stuff that is related to missing authorizations, for example. So that's something we can help you avoid or mitigate, and I'm going to show you how and how that exactly works first based on a couple of slides, and then we'll dive right into the system with Jeff's help. So what we have done is we've developed what we call the Xiting Authorizations Management Suite, or XAMS. So whenever I say XAMS, that's what I'm referring to. And the XAMS has the simple goal of making it easier to design new roles, to maintain them, to test them, and to automate many of the associated tasks that are usually very time-consuming and risky. And in addition to that, we also have the ability to do some custom AboveCode scanning and validation of SAP security concepts. And we'll see all of them reflected in a number of modules. As of right now, we have 7 modules, and I'll show you which ones we have. But before we do that, let's go over the key benefits of where we think the XAMS shines. And one of the key features is to simplify role testing. We have the ability to test roles in production, as crazy as that may sound, but without introducing any risk, without affecting or impacting your users at all. We have the ability to optimize and deauthorize RFC interfaces without introducing any risk. And for those of you who have looked at RFC interfaces in the past, especially ones that may have SAP all, then you know that how risky it typically is to take away authorizations from those interfaces, because if many interfaces only exist in production, you may only have one link to the bank in your production system, and you cannot easily replicate that in test or in queue. And so taking authorizations away from production interfaces has a very high risk of disrupting that interface, and if that's the case, then you may lose money or run into a whole bunch of issues that typically people try to avoid, and the way they avoid them is by simply not touching those interfaces and letting them run with SAP all. And that's obviously not ideal. Another area where we can significantly simplify your role maintenance is around derived roles and mass replication based on what we call org sets. And we'll see that later how that exactly works as well. Another area is SU24 optimization. We have the ability to more or less automatically optimize your SU24 based on your existing roles. We can compare them to see what's not yet in SU24. We can scan your custom ABAP code, look what's not in SU24 from an authorization check perspective, etc. All with the purpose of giving you a solid foundation that you can then use to build new roles reliably and sustainably. We also have the ability to significantly reduce the risk during go live. So despite everything that we can do up front before we go live, specifically for the go live phase, we have the ability to give users back their old roles for a temporary period of time based on a self-service portal. So users can go to a specific transaction, self-service transaction, and get their old roles back in case they get stuck. So then they don't have to wait for the role admin to fix whatever needs to be fixed. They can just continue working while someone else fixes whatever needs to be fixed. And last but not least, we have created the ability to automate security audits. So we've worked with some of the major auditing firms that I'm sure you're all familiar with, and we have taken their input and all the tests that they run through during an SAP security audit and have put it into software. So you can just install the software, push a button, and you get the same results as you would after a couple of week-long security audit. And all with the goal of having a return on invest that's reachable at about 1 year, and everything after you basically save more money than what you spent on implementing some of the suggestions that I'm going to tell you and we're going to tell you. But let's jump into the 7 core modules of the XAMS, and then let's see how they look and work in our demo system here. First, we're going to look at the role profiler on the right-hand side here. The role profiler, as the name implies, is the ability to analyze and profile your existing role concept and look for certain issues that can give you an idea of how robust and sustainable your role concept is. So we can look for roles that have open authorizations, changed authorizations. We can look for derived roles that are out of sync. We can look for roles with critical authorizations or combinations thereof. So there's a little bit of GRC capability built in. We can help you analyze all your display roles and tell you if any of those roles have more than just display activities. Same goes for roles with HR access or with master data access, etc. So a whole list, I think it's around 90 reports that you can run to get a solid understanding of how good your existing role concept is and where you have opportunities to optimize or potentially redesign. The next one is the ABAP Alchemist. The ABAP Alchemist, as I've mentioned before, is a custom ABAP code scanner, so you can use it to scan your custom code and check for SQL statements, missing authorization checks, existing authorization checks, etc., etc. We're going to see the exact finding patterns that we offer here in a bit once Jeff takes over. We use the ABAP Alchemist very often as part of a role redesign to optimize SU24. So we look specifically for authorization checks, either missing ones or existing ones, and compare them to what's in SU24. If there is the proposal missing for those checks, we can point that out and automatically update SU24 based on that. The next one is the role designer. That's one of the innovative solutions that we have that allows you to build new roles virtually in our own table space, so to say, based on trace data. So we can take, for instance, ST03 and trace data, we can load your existing roles, and we can compare that. We can see, okay, based on usage data, how much are your users over-authorized, and at the same time give you the ability to create new roles virtually and to run what-if scenarios. So you can assign certain roles to certain users and see how well those roles would cover your users based on the T-codes in the trace file, so that you get an understanding of how well those new roles would work for your users before you push a button and we deploy them into PFCG and you take it from there. Once you have done your analysis, once you have scanned your code, once you have designed your roles virtually, you can go into replicating those roles. So depending on if you use derived roles today or maybe only single roles, we can, in either case, we can significantly simplify the maintenance of those particular roles by allowing you to virtually model your organization basically based on what we call org sets or org set groups. An org set is nothing more than a collection of org fields that you want to associate with a template role. And then you can mass replicate that template role across all the other org sets in that particular group to create roles that are more or less identical except for those org fields. And the beauty of that is those roles are all single roles in the system, but they come together in a relationship in our tool. And we can certainly repurpose your existing derived roles and then make it easier to, let's say, add a company code to a particular role and automatically sync it down to all the affected roles or all the associated roles. Once you have done that, you may very well go into testing those new roles, and there we have what we call the role builder. The role builder gives you the ability to shadow users in production. So the way we do it is we create a reference user and assign a reference user to a dialog user that we want to shadow or test, and then we assign the new roles that we built to the reference user and allow the dialog user to keep the old roles. And so if you visualize that, you have a dialog user in production with all the old roles, so nothing has changed for the dialog user, nothing that would impact the dialog user, but in the backpack, so to say, through the reference user, we also have, or the user also has the new roles. And thanks to a change that SAP did for us a couple of years ago, whenever the SAP kernel performs an authorization check, it does it against the reference user first and only then against the dialog user. So think about that. Let's say you have a user that has currently SE16 through one of the roles. In the new role concept, you've taken SE16 away, or let's say for the sake of argument, you forgot to add SE16 to your reference or to the new roles, right? So if the user goes then into SE16, the SAP kernel would perform an authorization check against the reference user. It would fail, but then it would succeed ultimately against the dialog user. So the dialog user wouldn't be impacted at all, can get into SE16, but in the background, because of that pseudo failed authorization check, we get an error code that we can pick up, which tells us that we missed something in the new roles that succeeded in the old roles. And that we can use to optimize those new roles, and we obviously would do that in dev, transport those changes up to prod, and that error code would go away. And we let that shadowing run until we don't see any more error codes, and then we know we have new roles that fit those users perfectly, and it's time to go live. And when it's time to go live, we use exciting times, and exciting times gives you the ability to provide something similar to firefighter or emergency access management, but really focused on giving the user the ability to request the old roles back for a temporary period of time if the user gets stuck during go live. And we'll see how that works then in a couple of slides. And then last but not least, the security architect, we'll look at that again, allows you to create, validate, and implement SAP security concepts, and we deliver those concepts ready to use for you. You can certainly modify them, and we'll see how that works as well. There are also a couple of free tools that you can request for download, so if that's something you're interested in, shoot me an email afterwards. One is a user locking tool that allows you to schedule user locking and schedule the unlocking. That's especially convenient if you have a maintenance window coming up that starts at, I don't know, 1 a.m. in the morning, and you don't want to sit in front of the computer to lock your users and then unlock them again at 5 in the morning. You can just schedule that using the tool and have a good night's rest instead. And the other one is the stocktake tool, which gives you the ability to analyze your RFC connections, and we use it very often to estimate the effort involved in an RFC optimization project. With that being said, let's jump right into the first module, and then I'm going to hand over to Jeff to show you a couple of those reports to analyze your existing role concept. Again, as I've mentioned before, we offer roughly 90 reports. You can see some of them, or at least the categories, on the right-hand side. But the goal really is to improve the quality of our existing roles, to detect critical access, be it based on critical combinations of transactions or access to HR or master data. We use those reports as well to optimize SU24 and to detect issues that you need to look at. You also see a HANA reporting folder down there, the third from the bottom on the right, and that contains a number of reports that can show you the discrepancy between your role concept and one that you need to be S/4HANA compatible. As you may know, as SAP has changed the data model in S/4HANA, so you cannot just reuse your existing role concept. You need to optimize it. You need to take certain transactions out. You need to change some to other transactions that are new in S/4HANA, and we basically tell you exactly what needs to be changed, and more than that, we can make those changes for you. So with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Jeff, who is going to unmute and share his screen and show you Role Profiler in action. So Jeff, I'm going to make you presenter here.
Okay. Wrong one.
And your camera is on too, FYI.
Is it still on? I
yes.
thought I just turned it off.
Well, we can only see you from... There you go. Couldn't really see much of you either. Anyway,
yeah.
So
that's a good thing.
That's a good thing. You'd say so.
All right, can you see my screen?
Yep, screen is up.
Okay. Does everything look okay? Because it's really small on my screen, but I think that's just me. Okay. So the first thing we're going to go into is the Role Profiler, as Michael said. This is the exciting management suite that you see here. We're going to execute Role Profiler, the scanning tools, and it'll bring up the list of reports. So as Michael said, we have about 90 reports in here. We're going to go through about 7 of them just to give you an idea of how it works. When you run these tools, the first thing you need to do is go and select the scope of what you want to run the reports on. It's a typical selection screen. Most of you should be familiar with it. I have some test data in here. Yeah, so there we go. So we got some test data to run with. You can save this as a variant, so if you have multiple different reports that you want to run against different selections, you can. We can select users. You can use STO3N data versus whatever's in the system and that kind of stuff. All right, so let's go and look at the quality and sustainability reports. This is pretty much the bread and butter of the reports. These are some of the big ones that we've all had to go through and maintain before and create usually on our own. The first one I want to show you is manual authorizations. So one of the big issues that we have with role design is administrators tossing in manual inserted T codes or authorizations. Some of the big ones are the ST code, SRFC, SService, and SStart. The green lights mean for this role everything's good. There's no issues for ST code. The red lights mean you have an issue. If you double click on it, oh, hang on a second. My phone just started doing real weird things. Okay, so if you double click on the red lights, it'll show you the role, the authorization object, the field, and the values that are problems. Okay, so this will give you a quick overview of how you can go out and find missing authorizations. If we double click on the rows found, you'll notice that we get the missing authorizations for not just the ones that are defined here, but for everything in the role. Okay, so you'll see all the missing authorizations here. And so for missing authorizations, we also have stars. Those are flagged. Okay, so you generally don't want to have stars and everything. All right. So we have open authorizations. That's another big issue with roles. If you have open authorizations, your role is not complete. We have open fields. If we double click on it, it'll show us the open fields and where they're open. So SRFC shows you the role. And we also show you where you have open values in the org levels. Okay, so in our Watchdog report, $S part is missing, no values. Another issue, could be an issue if you have derived roles, maybe it's not an issue, but all right. Another issue that we commonly run into is full access, the dreaded stars. So by role, we'll show you the number of authorizations that have stars in them. Again, if you double click on it, it'll show you the role, it'll show you the authorization object, the field, and the values. So for most of these reports, you can double click on most anything and it'll give you some drill down information. We can also look at the number of objects. So there's 55 objects in that same role that have full star values. Modified orgs, we don't have any in this role. So that's where we're breaking the org level values, and somebody's put a star in there. Masked, this is another one. When you have ranges, so when you have a value plus a star, it's pretty wide open. I don't know if most of you know, SAP is now recommending that we put explicit values and not ranges in these if you can. Simply because if something changes on the business side, you don't know about it, you've given them access to it, and you didn't even know you did it. So that's a good report for finding that stuff. And then we have invalid. I don't have any in here. I'll have to update my test data so I can show you one. But this is basically masks where you have, it would be this kind of value, but then they would put something behind it like S_star, which really is invalid because it's already accompanied with that first star. All right, so one of the other reports, as you can see, we have a whole bunch of reports here. We have derived role reports. If you're using derived roles, this is a handy set of reports to go through. Show you things like child roles that have changes in them outside of the parent roles with undistributed changes, and then we can do the derived full comparison. And it'll look at it both ways on that side and report back. You can also fix those changes directly through these reports. We have role transporting. We can tie this into the transport system. So when people release roles and stuff, we can take a look at all the different changes that happen with the role when it's in and out of transports. So these reports are really good for if you have multiple security members working on the same role or working on separate changes, but they have them in the same roles, but different transports. This helps an awful lot with keeping track of the transports and the order of transports. We have role customizing. SU24 reports, as Michael said, I do not have anything. All our SU24 is very good in this system, so I wasn't able to generate an issue. I'm going to have to go destroy one of our SU24 values so I can create some content for you to see. But we look for things like ST code with parameter T codes, right? So these are all the big the big SU24 ones: S-taboo dis, S-taboo cli, S-taboo nom. We have a bunch of reports around that. Very useful. We have some HR structured authorizations. We'll look at SU24 for HR objects, another very sensitive area that deals with compliance. What else do we have? We have mitigation reports, role menu. I want to show you the Watchdog reports are very good. So we have some role Watchdog reports. Michael was talking about read-only values in Watchdogs, or in your roles. So if you have a set of roles that you've designed that are supposed to be read-only, which we all usually have in our systems, you can load those in our selection, save it as a variant, and you can go out and check your read-only values. We'll run it. I hit the wrong button. Hang on a sec. Let's go into here. And it'll show you areas where your roles don't have read-only access. So for this first one, we have a star, 01, 02, 02. So if you have a bunch of read-only roles and you want to make sure that they stay read-only roles, this is a very good report for that. What else do we want to go through? The critical auth watchdogs, these are very good. So we have the ability to set up critical authorizations and critical combinations of authorizations. So your SODs, basically. We deliver our own set with the system, but you can also add your own. So if we go in and look at this one, you'll see that we have several conflicts. It'll tell you what the conflict is. This is a basis conflict. Delete security logs. If you hit display, it'll show you exactly what the log or what the issue is. We have sadme fcd with a star, and it's supposed to be, this is the actual conflict. This is what's being flagged, right? So the conflict is, or the critical authorization is the AUDA and the STOR.
Yeah, and that's really meant for, if you don't have GRC, if you don't have access control, and you still would like to have at least, a basic SOD rule set, then that's what that is.
All right. Okay, and so then we have also the combination watchdog. Again, if you're not using GRC and you want to have your own, here's where we compare two different critical authorizations. This would be your SOD. And here we've got the role authorization, the role object, the value, and this is the ID. So when you set up your critical authorizations and your critical combinations, you create an ID and you lump them in auth groups. And this is what it's comparing against, which is the issue. So very good, delivered out of the box. And one of the other things Michael was talking about was the S4 HANA migration. So here's our HANA reporting. These first ones require that you actually have a HANA system to run against, which we do not yet have one stood up, so I can't run those, but this is the very good one when you're doing your migration. So for this role, it's telling us we have 12 transactions in that role that are obsolete and 2 new ones that are going to be introduced. So if we click on the 12, you'll get a list of the transaction, what transaction code is obsolete, the description. You can look at the SU24 value for it, and then you're going to get the replacement. So it's going to be replaced with transaction CK11N, and you can also go into the SU24 for that. And it'll tell you if we have an OSS note that gives you more information about it. There's the link to the OSS note. And if it's replicated, there's no replication. So if there's duplicate transactions for it. Okay. All right, Michael, that's all I had for the role profiler.
Okay, now before we go back then, are there any questions on the analysis and profiling? Okay, I don't see any hands, I don't see any questions, so let me take control of the screen again. And we're going to continue with the presentation. Alrighty, so we're going to go back here. Oh, there is one question now. So let me just click on show my screen and then we'll address the question. The proposed errors are based from what information? So based on there are a number of influencing factors depending on what exact report you're referring to, but for most reports it's looking at your role selection, of course, and in many cases like critical authorizations, we provide a customizing table that is pre-populated with what we consider are either critical authorizations or critical authorizations. In terms of S4HANA, the S4 HANA Migration report, we again look at your role selection and then we compare it to SAP simplification list, basically. So we've taken that list and we've added it to Role Profiler to compare how the change data model in S4 HANA would affect your role concept, and based on that we give you the list of what's obsolete, what's going to change, etc. Did that answer the question? Okay, perfect. All right, so next one we're going to go to there's a second question, so let's take that as well here real quick. Does XAMS separates a system that connects to ERP, or is it okay, very good question. The question is, how is it installed? How can it reach out to that system to analyze it? And XAMS is basically a transport. It's an ABAP program that you transport into the system you want to analyze. And for the most part, for almost all modules, we analyze the system we're installed on. There is one exception, or there are a number of exceptions. In some cases we can reach out via RFC to connected systems. That is especially true for the last model we're going to look at, the security architect, when it comes to comparing your systems with a security concept. And in that case, the auditing tool basically that we have, that can be run locally, but very often it's installed on Solution Manager and we would reach out to all the connected systems. For everything else you've seen so far, especially the profiling analysis part, we analyze the local system. All right, AboveCode, our classic AboveCode Scanner. This is going to be a very short from my end before we hand over to Jeff again. The goal of the AboveCode is to analyze your code. Of course, you can analyze standard code as well, but I'm not sure how useful that is. So it's typically used for analyzing custom code and scanning custom code. And here on the right-hand side in that screenshot, you can already see some of the finding patterns and also some of the objects that we can scan. So if you click on the object type selection, you get a list of object types you can scan, and that could be anything from a role or a program or a T code or WebDynPro component, whatever you want to scan. You can select the name, obviously with an asterisk. You can say Z asterisk and pick transaction as the object type to scan all your custom transactions. And then we have certain finding patterns that you can apply. And one important one, of course, is the authorization check statement, either a missing one or an existing one that can be optimized in terms of optimizing your SU24. Etc., etc. You can select the depth that you want to scan, so whenever one program jumps off to another one, we can follow that path up to a certain depth. You can pick the depth basically, but the higher that number, the longer the scan takes for obvious reasons. And we use the AboveCode very often for SU24 optimizations. We also have an API finder, and that's really useful as a developer tool. So if, let's say, you want to write code to update table USR02. You can certainly do that manually and develop that code from scratch, but chances are SAP already has a BAPI for that. And with the API finder, we tell you if there is existing code that you can repurpose. So all you have to do is type in USR02 as an example, as the table that you want to update, and we give you a list of BAPIs that can work with that table, either delete records from it or update or add, etc., etc. And that really improves your overall code quality because you reuse existing code rather than developing it yourself. And with that being said, we are actually at the demo already again, so very little talking this time and more demo. So let me hand over to Jeff, and he's going to show you how those scans look, what the results are, what you can expect in terms of findings, and what level of detail you get. So here he already went into the ABAP Alchemist, and you can take it from there, Jeff.
Okay. All right. So as Michael said, we have various object types that we can test against. The two that a security administrator mainly is going to be interested with is the transaction and a program, maybe function module, function group you'll dive into every once in a while. I'm going to test against a program. There's my test. Okay, also from a security standpoint, mainly there's three areas that you're going to want to look at from a security administrator standpoint, is the auth check statement, the authority checks in HR ABAP, so this checks to see whether what's been turned on in OOAC in your customizing. So which authority checks in HR are you actually activated? We're going to look at that, test against those and look for those missing ones, and call transaction auth checks. So places where in the code we're jumping and bypassing ST code, essentially. Again, we have the ability to look down inside 5 layers. We have this one. You can go as deep as you want. The standard is 5. So what this is going to do is it's going to, when your program jumps out to an include or another program, we tell it to follow that path all the way down. 5 levels is what this is talking about. Okay, you can go as long as you want, as far and as deep as you want. Just keep in mind that the longer or the bigger this number, the longer the program's going to take. So we'll just execute it, see what it comes back with. All right, so here we have a bunch of different checks or different things that were found, and we can sort those by basic view, by priority, call stick findings, authority checks. Let me drag this down a bit here. Authority checks including SU24 and enhancements. All right. So for this program, we're calling object. This is the objects being called or should be called. So we'll look for objects that are identified in the program and objects that are not identified in the program. So it'll look for keywords, and where it thinks that we need to have an authority check, it'll call those out as well. It's looking for activity 02, so the object is fine, the field is fine, the value is fine. The SU24 is probably what is the issue. We can go to the line, and it was found in level 3 of the program. All right, so it's obviously jumped out twice before off the main to find this issue. And there's the object type. So here's another one where we have an actual issue. We double click on it. Come on, give me the issue. It may not be in this program that we have the issue. All right, so the value is wrong. Again, here's another value where we have SU24. You can jump over and see the issue. You can look at the default values are down here at the bottom. So it's FTBUKRS. So it's obviously an org value. If we jump back over, the reason it's being called out is it's an org value. So it's an org value that isn't filled out in the program yet. So it's looking for something that we don't have. Okay, so let's go back over here. Let's keep on going down. Activity, this one is just missing altogether. So we're missing stuff altogether in here.
And it's important, to point out that not everything that's missing is a potential issue, like specifically with the values. In some cases it doesn't make sense to have values proposed in SU24, but if you see that the object, the field, and the value are missing, then that's definitely something to take a closer look at and see if it doesn't make sense to update SU24 based on those missing proposals.
Yep. And And so that's essentially the ABAP Alchemist from a security standpoint. I don't know if we have any developers on the line, but most of us are security folks. So that was really all I had to show Michael on this one.
Okay, very good. Let me switch back here and we continue to the next module. And the next module is the role designer. So now it starts getting a little bit more interesting, I believe. With the role designer, you have the ability to virtually model your new roles without them having to exist in the system. So that's really a nice capability because you don't affect anything in the system. You do everything in our own table space, basically. You can create new roles, you can test them for SOD conflict. So here at this point, we can actually reach out to access control if you have it, or use our built-in SOD engine to test your virtual roles against over SOD conflict. So that's in comparison to the traditional approach where you get notified about potential conflicts when you try to assign roles. So here you can already do all that virtually without having to assign anything. And as I mentioned initially, we leverage ST03N trace data to understand what users were doing in the system. And of course, your ST03N setting may only log for a very limited time frame. So you may only have trace data for a month and not 3 or 6 months. That would really give you a solid idea of what users are doing. So what we can do is we can scoop up whatever is there, and you keep logging and we scoop it up again, and we do that as often as necessary to get somewhere between 3 and 6 months of trace data, because that really gives you a solid understanding of what users are doing. If you only have 1 month, that may not necessarily be enough. And then we allow you to do one of a couple of things. We have templates for common job functions that you can just load. If you want to redesign or maybe even install or set up SAP on a greenfield, if you don't have any trace data and don't know what you're doing, you can just load those templates we provide and go from there. Or if you have solid trace data, then you can just drag and drop transactions over to your virtual roles and then drag and drop your virtual roles over to users to see how well they would be covered. And we're going to see that exactly how that looks in a couple of minutes. We can test those new roles. We have a number of test reports that allow you to maybe give you an idea of how much over-authorized users are based on your virtual roles or based on the old roles they have assigned. We can, or you can select a group of users, maybe all your finance guys, and we build you automatically a role that contains all the transactions those users have in common. That's very handy if you want to build a base role. Or we can find roles that fit selected users better. And by better, I mean they provide the same coverage based on the trace data, but have less authorizations or less T-code. So that reduces the chance of over-authorizing users with your new role concept. And ultimately, all of that reduces your test cycles. And we'll see how that works here in a second, once Jeff goes into a concept or a project, rather, a virtual project that he has set up. And he already loaded some trace data, I believe. Yep, so he's going to load a project. The project is nothing more than your users you want to design roles for, and alternatively your trace data. In our particular case, we have trace data from ST03N that we got from the production system, and we have the associated users and transactions, obviously. So this is the dashboard, and then Jeff can take over from here and show you the designer and report view.
Okay. So this is the initial screen for the designer after you've loaded a project. It'll show you the number of users in your project, the transactions total that those 3 users have used, any RFC connections. I didn't bring any of that into this because we don't do any of the RFC stuff out of this demo system, and the authorizations. So there's 225 total authorizations. It also gives you the month. So we have 8 months of data in this particular project. And so now we're going to go look at designing roles. All right, so when we go into the designing roles, let me hide this here. I don't want to close it. can't. All right. So I'm going to make this a little bit smaller in a sec. All right. So essentially we have three panes in this window. We have the transactions that were brought in with the project. This is where we're going to create our virtual roles, is in the second pane. We don't have any roles in yet. And these are the users in our project. Shows the number of T codes that they've used in our project through ST03N, how many they're unauthorized for, which at this point is 100%. They don't have anything they're authorized for. We haven't given them any roles, and the percent coverage that they have. All right, so the first thing we need to do is we need to create a new role, a virtual role. So we just double click on the create role. We'll give it a name. The March demo Z-X. We can make it a composite role as well. If you deal with composite roles, you can virtually create composite roles. That's new with SP12. I'm not dealing with composite roles. So now we have an empty role. Again, virtually, we can give it a name. I'm not going to do that right now. And so we can just assign T codes to it. You can assign T codes by dragging and dropping. Okay, so we should have, there's one T code, or we can drag multiple over and drop them. So one of the other things that's very useful is knowing who ran the transactions. So we can group the transactions. We have multiple ways to group transactions. We can do it by the SAP component, by the package, by the calling user, and if we imported roles with our project, we can do it by the role. Let's look at it by user. So now we can look at the users and see what they've been doing. For me personally, I've been in a lot of stuff because I do a lot of demos. So let's add a couple of other T codes here. And we'll drag and drop them onto our project. All right. So now we have a handful of T codes in this virtual role. And if you look over here at my ID, J Porter, you'll notice I have 110 T codes that I've used, and I'm unauthorized for 110. If we drag the role over and virtually assign it to my ID, you'll notice that I now have 10 T codes that I'm now authorized for out of that batch that I gave myself. So off that role, you'll see there's the role that's assigned. There's 16 used T codes. I have 110. So of those, 16 T codes were used by somebody, one of us three. Okay. I obviously used 10 of them. So we had 110, I'm down to 10. I'm down 10, so I have 100 that I'm not using. I have 9% coverage from what I had in ST03N. So this is showing us what we don't have access to, right? And how much coverage we have based on our ST03N data. Okay. So a few other things we can do at this point. We can go into the reports and we can start looking at the roles. We can start looking at the users. So let's look at my user. And it'll give us a status based on the role work that we did in Designer for all of our users. So I obviously have one role assigned to me. I have 110 that I used, 110 transactions I used in the ST03N data. I still am missing 100 authorizations. Okay. I have 9% coverage and I have a surplus of 6 T codes. All right, so there's 6 T codes that are in that role that I assigned myself that I haven't used. Okay. So if we noticed when we went back, we said the role had 16 T codes. I only used 10 of them. So this is telling me the stuff that I'm not using. These are T codes that I don't need. So this is your surplus. Another thing you can do in here during your project is you can actually make notes. So if you have multiple security administrators working on this project, you can go in here and make notes and say why you did stuff, what's not working, what is working. So this is just a place for you to detail the work that you're doing. All right, so one of the other things that would be really helpful is if we could go in and bring in current roles into our Designer and see how those stack up on users. So if we go back into reports and we go down to the role reports, Let's look at list the role status. So this is just the roles that we've created. We have my ZMarch demo. It's got 16 T codes in, it's on one user. If I want to make this an actual role now, I can force it over to Profile Generator. So I can click that button, it'll move all the T codes into Profile Generator, and we'll start the process of creating a role there. It's important to note that we're dealing only with T codes at this point. We're not into the authorization level. We're only dealing with the T codes. So at this point, I can upload roles directly out of Profile Generator into my project. So let's go find a role. I can upload a composite role, just to show you what composite roles look like when we bring them in. That's my composite role. I want to bring it in. And here we're going to get some options. So at this point, the standard is I can just import all the single roles directly into our project. It won't bring the composite parent role in, it'll just bring the children. I can tell it I want the whole thing, bring all of it. I want the parent and all the children for the composite, or I can ignore composites altogether. I can say I'm not dealing with composites, I have a whole string of roles here, I don't know which ones are composite, which ones aren't, ignore the composite roles. We can also work with derived roles. If you have standard derived roles that you're working with now, we can do the same thing with derived roles. Okay, we can translate your derived roles into a template role. So we can take your derived roles, combine them, and show it as a template role if you're trying to get away from derived roles and just make single roles. Or we can bring all the derived roles in and work with the derived roles. So you can see how those stack up. For this one, we're going to mess with the composite. We're going to bring it in. And you'll see where it has brought in the composite role and all the children. If we go back over to the designer, you'll see all of our single roles are here and the parent role is here. Okay, so just notice now that we have single roles off of the composite and we have the composite role in entirety. So we've got the composite and all the singles, and then here if we just want to mess with the singles and evaluate those, we can. Again, same functionality. If we drag and drop onto a user, maybe not a good user since Alessandro doesn't do a whole lot in our system. This composite had 59, and this is not a good fit because it doesn't give him anything that he's used. So he's still got 0 coverage. Let's see if Anya gets a better. Nope, Anya doesn't either. Okay. So that's composite roles. Derived roles would work the same way. They would come in with the derivations and all the children, and then all this child roles would be brought in as well. Okay. All right, Michael, that's just the quick dirty for the designer.
Okay. Do we have any questions at this point before we
Typically we do.
Yeah.
Typically we will.
Let's give folks a second here to type in any questions, or if you want to raise your hand and I can unmute you and you ask your question. Otherwise, we'll move on and address any questions in a little bit. Alrighty, so I don't see any new questions at this point, so let's move on to role replication. So we've designed roles at this point virtually. We may have pushed them into PFCG using that generate button we've seen before, and maybe we only created template roles for the purpose of replicating them, especially if you have a global organization with maybe either different business units or different locations, geographic locations that you want to build roles for, and if all those roles pretty much look the same except for the org fields, then you can use Role Replicator for that. So Role Replicator is meant to give you a tool to model your organization, and again, you can model it based on geographic locations, based on business units, based on combinations thereof. And so what you see here is an org set group, and in this particular case it's based on geographic location. Below that org set group you have all the org sets. So in this particular case, Asian countries. And each org set has a number of org fields that you can add and obviously give it a value. And then you can assign a template role to an org set and mass replicate that role across all the other org sets in your org set group. And you can do that with single roles, and you can certainly also do that with your existing derived roles. And if you wonder, well, why would I want to do that? The reason is, or the advantage of derived roles obviously is that if you add one T code to the parent and synchronize it down to all the children, you only have to do that once, and all the affected roles would have that new T code. But what about org fields? If you want to add a company code to one particular role and synchronize it down, that's not as easily possible, and that's really where Role Replicator comes in, by giving you that ability. So you can use it in combination with derived roles, or you can use it standalone, of course. And in addition to that, we can then check your existing roles to make sure they are still in sync with your model here. So we give you a report and tell you exactly which roles are out of sync, and you can click on the details, and we do a full comparison and tell you exactly where those roles differ, and then you can click on synchronize, and we synchronize all those changes down, overriding any manual changes someone may have done in PFCG. And of course, if you want to add a company code somewhere, you do it once in Role Replicator, click on sync, and we synchronize that change down to all the affected roles. And Jeff is going to show you how that works in the system, rather than me just talking about it. So Jeff, I'm going to make you presenter, and you can show us how the replication works and how you can compare your potentially out of sync roles.
Okay. All right, so we have two use cases I'm going to go through today. One is just the normal out of the box, we're going to replicate a single role and apply an org set to it. The next one is we're going to look at derived roles and how we can do this with derived roles. So the first thing we have to do is we have to create an org set. Okay, so here's our org sets basically through here. We can just click on create. We'll give it a name. We're going to tell it we want to create an org set. We could create a group, and so a group is simply where you can nest org sets underneath, and you can nest org groups under org groups if you want. For our purposes, we're just going to create a quick org set. Here's our org set here. If we right click on it, we can now add a field. And these are all the org values. You'll see there's all of them here, plant, the ones you're used to. We can give it company code, and then we'll give it a value. We'll give it 01. Hit save. Expand our org set, and there's our value. There's our company code. Okay, we can save it, and now we've created our org set. Okay, for our demo, when we replicate this to a different company, I'm going to use one of these simply because I have some data there I want to show you. So once we've created our org sets, now we need to replicate and apply them to roles. We're going to go back out, and we're going to go to the org fields replicator. And here's where we're going to create what we call replicant pairs. So we're going to create. This is just a 1-to-1 ratio for now for this demo. This first part, we're going to do a demo, and our template role that we're going to use, we have to pick a role that we want to use as a template. And so we'll just, I have some built here, we'll just use it. Then we have to give it the name. This is going to be the name. In this case, this is the role that already exists that we want to use to copy, and this is the role that we're going to create or replicate, if in our terms here. And so let me bring this back over here. All right, and so now we're going to tell it what org set we want to use. In this case, I'm going to apply, excuse me, I'm going to apply, which one? I'm going to apply this one here. Okay, there we go. so now we have our role has been created. Where did it go? Create it. Where is my ZJB Porter RO test? There it is. Got lost there for a minute. Okay, and so you'll see that it's red, so it does not exist yet. We have not created it yet. So if we go ahead and synchronize it, we can write it to a transport if we're going to transport this forward, which we're not going to do in this case. We'll refresh the data. Okay. And now it shows that we're that we have been synchronized all the way across. We're synchronized. Okay. We can go in and look at it. Here's our role. The menu. This is the template role. No derivations. We can go back. We can look at the new role that we just created. Here's the authorizations. Here's our org levels. And we have one missing. Sales org is missing. All right. So let's go back. Notice that sales org was missing. Missing something here. Yeah, that's what I was missing. Here's the compare. That's weird. Okay. So we actually have a compare button where you can actually go out and compare now. And we'll see the sales org is not part of our org set, but it is a value inside the role that we created, right? So we should be, we're not there. We're missing a role or a value in our org set. So let's go back to our org set. Save it first. Don't want to lose our data. And let us add sales organization to it. We're going to add a field. Let's add sales org. We'll give it a value of, I guess, 001, since that's all that's available. Okay, so now we've added that missing value. We'll go back into our roles here. And you'll see that we are now out of sync again. Okay, so let's synchronize it. Refresh our data. And we're back in sync. And for the life of me, I don't know why this is not showing up over here. There we go. If we compare, you'll see all our values are there. If we jump on over to Profile Generator, we'll see that the value has been added for this role.
And there is one question. Apparently, someone paid attention at the last webinar when I may have mentioned that we prefer single roles over derived roles. And so the question is, when roles are replicated, are you still applying the same derived role concept to keep authorizations consistent across versions, quote-unquote versions, except for org values by designing the org sets?
I didn't understand the question, I guess.
Okay,
are we keeping the T codes and the non-org authorization values the same?
Yeah. So let me unmute maybe Amy real quick, and she can ask the question.
Hi.
Amy. Hey.
Yes. Hi. So yeah, you guys recommend a single role approach, which is more flexible. But when you do these replication, are you still keeping everything else the same, like the SAP derived roles? So the T codes and all the other non-org authorizations, are they the same across the derived, your replicated roles?
Yes, they're going across the same. Yeah, so really the only difference we're making is we're not doing the
not linking it to a template, basically.
Yeah, we're not linking it via the SAP Derived. So AGR, what is it? AGR define, table AGR define. Yep. So that link is not there for this example. Now we can use replicated or we can use derived roles as well and do the same thing. That part of the maintenance would be outside of ours though. So you would still use the SAP methodology of going to the parent and pushing your changes down that way. When you use derived roles, all we're replicating at that point is the org sets and the org values.
Okay. And the reason for that is to allow flexibility if we want to make them different later on?
Yes.
To not have that relationship.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you would pull it out of the template and make it a different one. So yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep.
All right. Okay. All yours again.
Okay. So now we're in the role and our sales org is still there, is back, and we're good. All right. So let me go back here. Okay, and so we can do the same thing with derived roles, as we were just talking about. This example was single roles, and when you replicate it, I showed you just a one-to-one. We're going to take a template role, we're going to make one single role. You can also do multiple roles, all right? This is not the derived. You can pick a template role, just like we did, and stack in as many replicated roles as you want and apply the different org sets to them as you see fit, right? And so you can mass create your derivations, if you will, or your derived roles. Your replicated roles, sorry, we're not dealing with derived. We can also do the same thing with derived roles. I don't necessarily need to show it because we're starting to run short on time, but it works the exact same way. We just pick one of the derived roles, use that as the template, and everything works the same. We just apply an org set and push it down. Okay. Michael, that's all I had for the derived or for the replicated roles.
Okay.
If anybody wants to see an actual thing of the derived, we can certainly crank one out, but it's the same process. So.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you very much. So let's move on to the next module, the role builder. For this one, I'm going to only show you slides because the demo would be a little bit more elaborate to set that up. But the idea really is to test your new role. So let's assume you have virtually designed roles, you have published them into PFCG, you have done your replication, a derivation, however you want to call it, and whatever methodology you want to use. But at that point, you're ready to test. And instead of going to Q or to your test environment to test your new roles, and by following a test script, we go a different approach. We create, through the XAMS, a number of reference users that you can assign to your dialog users that you want to test. And we typically recommend, for the sake of keeping an overview of what's going on, to go maybe, department by department. So let's say we pick all of our finance users, we mass create reference users for them, we assign those reference users to the corresponding dialog users. So there is a mapping table that you can use to map reference user to dialog user, and then you assign your newly created roles to those reference users. So if you visualize that, your dialog user would have the new roles in the backpack through the reference user, while still using all the old roles. So that's very important. We are not taking anything away or limiting the user or impacting the user in any way. The user continues working with the old roles. But in the backpack, we have the new roles. And I've mentioned initially, SAP has made a change that results in the SAP kernel performing authorization checks against the reference user first and then against the dialog user or the corresponding roles. So if I go into SE16 and I used to have access to SE16, but in the new roles I don't have that anymore, then we would get a specific error code in the backend that we can scoop up that does not impact the user, because the auth check would ultimately succeed because of those old roles that still have SC16 access. And the advantage of that approach is that during that shadowing phase of those users, we get a log with a particular return code for each authorization check that failed against the reference user but ultimately succeeded against the dialog user. And here return code 0 means auth check failed against reference user, succeeded against dialog user, and that means two things for us, or one of two things. One is we missed something in those new roles, like SC16 I've mentioned before. It used to work in the reference user, it doesn't work anymore, so that means our newly created roles need to be fixed. And we do that fixing in dev, we transport those changes up, and then those error codes in production would go away. The second use case is we have taken SC16 away intentionally. We don't want that user to have SC16 anymore, and in that case, we can select a particular auth check and say hide it, because we are aware of it. It doesn't make sense to clutter up our log here. We want to focus on the stuff that we missed, that would have failed with those new roles. And so we look at all the return code zeros, we either hide them if that's something we took away intentionally, or we use that to fix the new role. And by doing that, at some point we'll have no more error codes, and then we know now we're at a point where we have roles that fit users perfectly. And we've done the best testing we could do, namely real users in production. And it's just a matter of doing that long enough to cover major events, like closing the books at the end of the year. Obviously you want to cover such events as part of your shadowing, and you can do that shadowing for 3 months, and then you stop it, and then you pick it up again towards the end of the year if you want to. But the bottom line really is this testing in production, or productive test simulation as we call it, can potentially replace all your standard unit testing you would have done in Q. And without taking away time from your users, your business users, they may not even know that they are testing. They just do their job. The second important capability of this role builder module is the ability to create delta roles. So if you still want to do testing in Q, and if you have a dedicated testers, then you can do that certainly. And role builder, for every failed authorization check in Q or in test, can create a delta role and automatically and immediately assign it to the tester, so that the tester never gets stuck. So let's say a tester has to go into SC16, we forgot to give SC16 through the new roles, tester gets stuck. Within a second or so, we create a delta role, assign it to the tester, and the tester can continue. Now, of course, there are certain transactions you never want to automatically assign to testers, because they may be trying stuff, just to gain access. And for that purpose, we have a blacklist, and that's indicated by those lines in red. We have a whitelist, that stuff, that's not critical and we can automatically assign. It's in green. And then we have a gray list. That's something in between where you can decide if that's something you want to automatically have a delta role created for, or maybe not. And so those are the two key features of Role Builder, which significantly simplify your testing efforts. Hand in hand with that goes exciting times during go live. And with exciting times, we basically flip the switch. So if you want to look here at the right, you'll see that now the dialog user suddenly has the new roles assigned in SU01, and the old roles are assigned to the reference user. But at that point, during go live, we disassociate the reference user from the dialog user. So we break that association, but we keep that reference user available in case the user runs into an issue during go live. So let's use our SC16 example again. We missed that during our testing for whatever reason, because in 6 months during shadowing, that user never used SC16, and then suddenly during go live, the user has to use it. we have not authorized the user for SC16, so the user gets stuck. But the user had SC16 in the old roles, and what the user can do is go to a self-service transaction and say, give me my reference user and implicitly my old roles back for the next hour, because I need to go into SC16 to do something, to maintain a table. And you can give a reason, or the user has to give a reason, has to put in how long that reference user is required, and you can obviously limit that on the back end. You can put a workflow around that someone has to pre-approve that assignment, but we typically recommend to do a post-approval so that the user gets the reference user immediately, and later on someone signs off on it. Of course, at the end of that session, a designated person would get the detailed logs with the trace logs and everything, so that person knows what the user was doing during that session. And you can limit the exposure of that reference user or those authorizations to make sure the user A doesn't get more authorizations than they had before, or you can limit it in some other ways to, if there is a concern of that potentially the reference user could elevate access, then you have controls over that as well. But in a typical case, the exposure is limited to authorizations the user had before anyway, so that should be not very critical. And during that session, if you were to go into SC01, you would actually see that reference user assignment. So we use standard reference user for that purpose. And we take them automatically away at the end of the session, either because the session times out on the back end, or because the user determined he or she only needs it for an hour, but the total session could be valid for 2. In that case as well, we take it automatically away from the user. So the user cannot forget to give back the old authorizations and roles. And let me ask you at this point, are there any questions before we move on to our last module, the Security Architect, that Jeff is going to demo again? Okay, I don't see any questions, so let me jump over to the Security Architect and give you just a quick overview, and then we'll have Jeff show us how that works in the system. So Security Architect is a module that delivers ready-to-use security concepts. A security concept is nothing more than a written document that explains exactly how SAP as a system or a particular module or application are supposed to be set up according to best practice and according to what the major auditing firms test for when they do a security audit. So we deliver those concepts that are ready to use, and we have concepts available for ERP, for NetWeaver Java, for HCM, for Solution Manager, for IDM, for HANA as a database, for single sign-on, and GRC, if I haven't mentioned that yet. And within each concept, we also deliver tests and checks that can reach out to your systems and test them for compliance to the concept. And without explaining any more, let me hand over to Jeff, and he can show you, I think based on an ERP concept, how that looks like.
All right, so let me start the architect here, not the dashboard, the architect. And we're going to pick a version. I already have some test data out here, or some versions out here. So let me go ahead and just show you one that's already been built. Okay, so here is the available templates. I don't know what we have installed out here. Let's see, we have, this is for the ERP. You can add, one of the things that we have the ability is you can add your own fields to this, your own documents. So if you currently have a controls catalog or something that you're using to define your security implementation, you can incorporate a lot of that in here. But we have just a standard template, and you choose which version, what parts of it you want to use just by clicking on the check mark. Okay. After you go through the initial coverage, let's just pick like a main goals. So this is kind of what it looks like. These can all be changed, updated, replaced with your version or your updates. Okay. So once we're down to that, you've picked your stuff. There's my test company. You can also include your own logos, company information into the document as well. They'll show up down here in the use sections. So everything we selected here will show up down here. You can expand them. You'll see the main goals again. Be the same. Let me see if we've got something in here for, yeah, here we go. So here's our own. And so this is what it would just be, your text would be in here. But you can insert it, you can move stuff where you want it. We can say we want it there, and now we've changed it. It can go up here, wherever you want to put it. So you can really modify the document to work how you need it and how you want it. Okay, so once we've got all the use sections in here that we've said we wanted to use, we can also look across systems. So anything, if you install this on a solution manager system, all your connected systems will show up, and you can use the same concept to define and test against all of your connected systems. So we can do a check scope. We can tell it what we want to check based on our selections up here. So if we want to look at authorizations, the stuff that we have not selected is grayed out. We can pick S data set, S number. So you can run a check against any of those things that we've defined up in the top part here. Just know that the more you select and the more systems you're going across to go check, this will run for a long time. You'll need to run it in the background. It could run for a while. So once you run a test, I'm not going to run one because they do take a little bit of time. It'll show up down here in the check history. All right, so you can kick it off in the background, come back tomorrow, and your check will be here. If you did a local, so you're only looking at the one system, it'll show up here by date. Or you can do remote checks. If you're doing across systems, you can click on here. These will be your remote checks. Okay. We can also compare checks. All right, so I can go back and I can say, I want to know how my remediation is going between some checks I did back here and my last one. Simple enough. You go up to Tools, Compare Check Results, pick your system. We're just going to do the single system. Show me all the checks. We'll go down a bit. We'll say I want to see my last test against this test. We'll execute it. And here's your, we don't have much checked for these, simply for a demo, but everything that you had checked would be showing up, would show up here. It'll show up if you're good. So for this system, or for this check on the 20th, we're good. 23rd, that one wasn't checked, so we didn't have cat checked for this one. RFC, we've got an issue, and it'll tell you what the issue is. So the username has a problem with the dialog user, obviously running a batch. Okay, so we've got different checks. You can look at the status. So this allows you to go back and compare checks that you've done. So when your audit team comes around or you're preparing for an audit, you can check your remediation across the system and as you go. And so it's a simple thing of preparing for an audit, or when the auditors walk in, you can hand them this document and show them where you stand on everything. Okay, and so that is pretty much all I have for this one, Michael.
Okay, then maybe let's see if there are any questions particular to the security architect. But if not, I actually missed two questions before from Amy, and I think they were still around the testing and potentially the exciting times. So let me unmute Amy again, and let's pick up those two questions, and then we'll go back to security architect and see if there are any questions for that module. So Amy,
Hi.
the floor is yours.
Yeah, so for the previous section, when a user requests a temp access and they're getting the reference user additional to their new role assignment, correct? Sorry about that.
Okay, you may have to repeat that again.
Yeah. When users get the temp access through the reference user, they're keeping their new role assignment, and then in addition they're getting temporary access
Correct.
through the reference user.
Yes.
So technically they could be getting more access than they had before, right? Because for whatever reason the roles are changing, they could be losing access, but by adding, so if they were, so my example was, if they get SE16 from the reference user, but the new assignments, the new roles that they could have additional table access that are now open that wasn't there before the go live.
Yeah, that is correct. So typically, yes, that is absolutely correct. So, and typically what you would do is, we didn't discuss it in detail, but when you create those new roles and you assign it to a reference user, and then when you take the old roles and assign them to a reference user, and you have the new roles for the dialog user, at that point you're probably gonna go back to a role profiler and test, for instance, for maybe critical authorizations, because you may be introducing SODs, right, or
Right.
something of what you just said. So you go back to the analysis part and make sure that you're not introducing a problem by combining those two. Yes, that's a very good point, and absolutely correct.
Okay, so can that be done ahead of time? Because they're
Yes.
requesting that temp access on the fly, right?
Yes, correct. So you can certainly do that ahead of time, and the thing is, you can safely assign the old roles to a reference user and the new roles to the dialog user, as long as you don't associate the reference user with the dialog user, right? Or make that reference available, that reference is available to the dialog user, or you just do that. You can also do that before you even go live. So before you assign the new roles to the user and take the old ones away, you can already analyze the combination of new roles and old roles without having to assign those new roles to anybody, right?
Okay. And is there a mass analysis that could be done for the new and old role combined for each user?
Yeah, so there are reports available. There are one of two scenarios that you can address. That one is using the role profiler, and some preliminary checks you can already do during the role design phase. So if you want to just test based on T codes, you can do it in Role Designer. If you want to go to the actual authorization objects and corresponding values, you would have to use the role profiler for that.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. All right. So that covered basically both of your questions. Right? There was a two-part question. Okay. All righty. Then, do we have any questions regarding the security architect, auditing, and tests? Anything there? Okay, I don't see anything so far. So then we can slowly start wrapping it up. We're at about 1 hour and 36 minutes, so we are slightly ran slightly longer than I expected, but that's fine. Certainly less time than what was scheduled. So let me make me presenter again and go back to my presentation here to wrap it up. So I just want to give you a couple of more information. One is an OSS note that you may be interested in, specifically when it comes to using what we showed you to optimize RFC interfaces. So we can use a combination of what you've just seen, especially the testing and the Delta role creation for RFC optimization projects. And there is an OSS note where SAP, in fact, recommends using the XAMS for exactly that purpose, because we are the only ones who can do it virtually risk-free. There is also a very good demo video, well, not really a demo video, but an overview video that gives you more of a high-level overview of the benefits of the XAMS. It's something, you know, for executives to look at if they want to see what the XAMS is all about. And then at the very end, our contact information. If you have anything more that you want to discuss, or if you want to see maybe do a proof of concept, get a copy of the software, you know, you can reach out to me directly. If you have any technical questions, please feel free to reach out to Jeff directly, and we can take it from there offline. And I don't see any more questions here, so I think everything is or was relatively clear. And I thank you again for spending over 1.5 hours with us. I very much appreciate it. I hope you got something out of that. Again, we're going to have a recording of this webinar, so you'll get all the information in case you missed something via email, so you can replay it. And again, if you have any further questions, maybe tomorrow or the next couple of days or weeks, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be more than happy to jump on the phone with you and discuss whatever needs to be discussed. All right, thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hopefully we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.